And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, and X. Don't forget, you can take the show with you 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. Just search for the Nick Craig Show wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe or follow button and you'll get a new program delivered each and every weekday morning. You can also listen on the website by visiting that. It is nickcraig.com. Want to thank once again the law group here in Wilmington for their continued support of the program. Some more details coming up on them a little bit later on as we roll through this Thursday edition. This morning we're focusing on an interesting story that ran last week. It came out Friday. It ran over at WHQR, and since then a response from a parent who is also a Board of Education member, Josie Barnhart, as it relates to this story. The headline, Wrightsboro parent pushes for book ban, appeals after school committee rejects their challenge. So you've got this article running over at WHQR. Rachel Keith is the author of it, and it goes through the process of a parent challenging a book known as Blended by Sharon Draper. That's the name of the book. Or that's the name of the book and the author of the book, Sharon Draper. Now, it's important to note that as a parent within the school district, you should be involved in your child's education. You should be encouraged to be involved in your child's education. And it seems to me that looking at this article and what it's trying to do it seems as an attempt to silence parents. There's not really a story here. The story, it doesn't really exist. A parent was concerned about content within a book. They followed a process that is spelled out in the Parents' Bill of Rights to go through this book, to follow the legal process of bringing up concerns about it, going through and filling out the paperwork associated with it. There's not really a story. Now, the reason that the story was written, of course, over at WHQR, the local NPR affiliate here in Wilmington, is because it pushes the narrative further over book banning. Right? That's why a story like this was published. There's no news in this at all. It's not interesting that a parent challenged a book. There's really nothing here to talk about, but because it fits the broader left-wing narrative of Republicans are book banners, that's why this article was written. And I don't intend to read through the entirety of the article because it's just not really relevant, and it's just not super interesting. There's really nothing in here that is a shocking news story, I would argue, is of even interest to people in New Hanover County. But I'll go through a little bit of it. This is reading directly from the article. Blended is about Isabella, an 11-year-old girl with a white mother and black father. Early in the book, her parents get a divorce, but then decide to remarry. Isabel navigates these new relationships also while gearing up for her classic piano recital. She deals with some incidents of racism in school, but also learns about the writing techniques of famous black writers, including Jason Reynolds. The end of the novel culminates in a racial profiling incident with police. During a traffic stop, Isabella is shot by an officer. She recovers and becomes a spokesperson for police reform. Well, that sounds pretty interesting for a book. An 11-year-old girl is racially profiled by the police. She is of mixed race. She is then shot by a police officer and becomes an activist for police reform? That sounds a little bit like indoctrination to me. Why? I mean, what is the, when you look at various pieces of literature in education, the question is often asked, what is the educational value of something like this? Now, I will be the first to admit I have not read Blended. That's the name of the book. I have not read it. I have skimmed through excerpts of it. I have done what I would argue is due diligence as it relates to this book, but I have not read it front to cover. So I'll be the first one to admit that. So with those details in the book, which I would say are incredibly extreme, an 11-year-old girl being shot by the police because she's mixed race is not necessarily a message that is an accurate portrayal or representation of society. So with that, this parent according to the WHQR article, took concern with the maturity level of the subject matter and accused the author of taking liberties by injecting an incident of racial tension into the book and voiced concerns about how these scenes where Isabella is shot by a police officer would impact real-world relationships between students and school resource officers, SROs, who are members of the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office. And that seems realistic. I mean, if you've got children reading a book about how if they're not white, they're going to be racially profiled and then shot by the police, that absolutely could have an impact on children within the public education system. It's been a whole push by the left, the defund, the anti-police movement that you've seen over the last couple of years is an attempt to destroy the trust and the relationship between duly sworn law enforcement and the public. That's been the attempt of all of these anti-police movements. They pick various situations that unfold in law enforcement around the country. There are hundreds of thousands of sworn law enforcement officers across the United States. They pick very specific cases that they believe fits their political narrative, fits their political agenda, and blow it up into a national scandal. That's what these left-wing activists do. And it appears obvious that the author in this book, based on how she weaved in the fact that an 11-year-old girl was shot by the police, was racially profiled by the police, and then shot by them, very much fits that narrative. I don't really think there's much argument there at all. So with that, a school-level committee rejected the initial challenge, saying that the book could stay there. The parent wasn't satisfied with the decision, so they followed the process and appealed it to a district-wide committee. Again, there's not really a news story here. A parent filled out a form that is available on the county school system's website, submitted it to the school. I guess we'll learn about the process coming up a little bit later with Board of Education member and parent Josie Barnhart. But they filled out a form that is on the school system's website. It was submitted to a school level review committee, for lack of a better phrase. That's what we'll call it. The school committee said keep it, and the parent, I guess, has the right to appeal that if they choose to do so. So again, there's still not a news story here. WHQR requested to review the parent's complaint and subsequent appeal on April the 11th. The district filed the public records request on May the 7th with the parent's name redacted. The district had repeatedly claimed that the parent's identity is protected by FERPA, a federal law that protects student privacy. So this is the real question and where we're going to go with the discussion this morning. Why does WHQR feel the need to publish the parent's name? Right? This is when we get into the realm of intimidation and stopping parents, silencing parents from bringing up concerns within the school district because they don't want their name plastered over NPR's website. They don't want left-wing public media plastering their name all over the place. It could have ramifications for them in their job. It could have ramifications for them in their relationships with their friends. They don't want that. This is an attempt to silence parents that are involved in their children's education. The fact that WHQR even filed a public records request on this indicates that they had some insider information because there's no news story here. There's nothing interesting about a parent filing a complaint. I'm sure there are hundreds of these that are filed, maybe not hundreds, but 100 of them that are filed a year. This is not a very rare thing, at least from all accounts, that is happening within the school district. But in an attempt to intimidate, in an attempt to push forward the narrative of book banning and those damn Republicans trying to ban books and control what your children can see in the classroom, WHQR felt the need to demand the parent's name. Of what relevance, I have no idea. But I can only assume it was for intimidation purposes. To put that person's name out there in an attempt to silence other parents from going through this same process. Because nobody wants their name, especially just a parent, right? Public figures, elected officials, different stories. But a parent of a child within the New Hanover County school system does not want their name plastered all over WHQR's website. They don't want a bunch of left-wing lunatics commenting on Facebook about how this parent is a fascist for having the audacity to follow a process that has been established to look at content within the school system. I mean, that is an absurd thing that WHQR is attempting to do here. But again, it's all pushing their narrative. The Wrightsboro parent filed the original complaint in January of 2024. I guess that should say 2025 probably, saying that the book was educationally unstable and inappropriate to the age, maturity, or grade level of the students. The parent wrote, "My child said to me, 'Please don't talk to my teacher. I don't want her to get in trouble. Keeping an open dialogue is crucial for me, and I don't feel like I don't want people to have to second guess the well-being of my kid.'" They also affirmed that they didn't consult with any authoritative resources on the book, but outlined the issues that they had with it. And then it goes through the process. Now, all the way at the end of the article, WHQR once again goes into the parent's identity, an attempt to dox and provide private information about a parent within New Hanover County to the public. The district's initial claim that the school-level committee was protected by the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, is a federal law that protects student educational records, which include items such as grades, transcripts, health records, schedules, financial information, and discipline records. The district later shifted its argument, saying that the complaint could be released, but with the parent's name redacted. Seems realistic. Why should a parent have to deal with the, in this case, intimidation of left-wing media and their left-wing supporters over just having a concern over something in their kid's classroom? That seems to be a ridiculous bar. And NHCS attorneys provided the information redacted to WHQR. Here's where things get interesting. Several sources who wish to remain anonymous contacted WHQR, suggesting that Republican school board member Josie Barnhart was the parent who had filed the complaint. Now, this is incredibly concerning. So you've got individuals within the school system that had access to the unredacted documentation, the unredacted form filled out by the parent, and they decided, in an attempt to push forward a political narrative and agenda, they were going to go to the local NPR affiliate in Wilmington and give the information to them. Now, why would they do something like that? Why would an individual entrusted with this information within the school district go and provide this to local media? There's no scandal. There's no discussion of bribery, a cover-up, some sort of big scandal within the school district. It's a simple form that was filled out by a parent challenging a book. That's it. There's no money switching hands. There's no embezzle. I mean, there's no drama here. It's just a simple form that was filled out. But because left-wing activists within the school district, which that's who they are, left-wing activists within the school district believe it's their right to release this information to the public. They believe that their own political ideology and agenda is more important than the process. They decided to go squeal to Rachel Keith over at WHQR and invade this individual's privacy. But because it was a Republican school board member that did it, now that's where the story becomes real juicy for left-wing media. Asked by email if she had filed the request for reconsideration of resources about Blended, Barnhart responded by saying, "Thank you for reaching out. This is my official board email. If you are requesting records about records request, I would suggest that you submit a FOIA request." Barnhart did not follow up to following emails asking her directly if she had filed the complaint. So this story ran on Friday in an attempt to provide private information about a parent within the school district in what I believe is an attempt to silence them and an attempt to make sure that other parents don't go through this process. This is textbook definition of intimidation because nobody wants their name run in a news article when they didn't do anything wrong. They just submitted a form to the school district. They didn't commit a crime. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't do anything bad at all. They simply submitted a form that is available on the school system's website. So it's obvious intimidation. So I was keeping an eye on this on Friday. Will admit I did reach out to board member Josie Barnhart after I read this, and we started dialoguing. Then yesterday, I got an email from her and a post on her Facebook page, and it reads as follows. I will read through this entire statement. It reads as follows. The headline: Parent speaks out after being politically targeted. The statement: as a parent of 3 children, I take my responsibility to be actively involved in their education very seriously. I have and will continue to support efforts that enhance opportunities in public education and simultaneously address concerns as they arise with my children. I am deeply troubled by recent media reports suggesting that staff members may have violated both the law and my children's privacy. I waited to make this statement out of respect for the process. It is unacceptable for those entrusted with our children's well-being to weaponize sensitive data in violation of FERPA simply because of my position on the school board. This isn't just a breach of trust, it's political targeting that used my children as collateral. Our school system has a well-established, legally binding process that prioritizes the role of parents when concerns arise about classroom content. The Parents' Bill of Rights makes it clear that only parents, not board members, may initiate these concerns. This breach of privacy is a direct attack on your and my parental rights, and I refuse to stand by when there is an attempt to intimidate and silence parents who follow the process. I ask one question: if they are willing to do this to me, who's next? Never feel bad about advocating for your children. The process is intended to allow for open communication. Accountability on merit must remain a cornerstone of public education. Leaking private information because of disdain for Republicans rather than discussing the merits of the concerns raised by a parent is not professional. It's disgraceful. This kind of behavior demands accountability along with changes in protocol. Releasing information to create media buzz and sow division in our community before the district has made a decision about the content shows a clear attempt to manipulate, sway, and intimidate decision makers under the false claims of book banning. I started this process 6 months ago, not utilizing my position on the board to influence, but rather taking the appropriate channels all parents are given. Now, with these intentionally muddied waters, the process is tainted, which is unacceptable. Parents, don't second guess advocating for your children. Collaboration is a core benchmark for effective education, and this targeting is harmful to the integrity of the district. I support all children receiving a sound basic education free of political targeting. My family fell victim, and I refuse to stay silent. Signed, Josie Barnhart, mom of 3. As I mentioned, Josie Barnhart also is a school board member in New Hanover County. For longtime listeners of me, folks that followed me back on the radio, we walked through Josie with the campaign. She was a regular guest in the campaign in 2022 as she ran for school board. Then once becoming a school board member, she joined me, a dozen times or so. She was a frequent staple of the program as it related to issues involving the school board and the New Hanover County Board of Education. This whole thing is incredibly concerning. As I mentioned, the only reason WHQR wrote this article was because it involved what they perceived to be a Republican school board member. How did they know that information? Because somebody within the school district, an employee that you and I pay for with our taxpayer dollars, decided that their own political agenda and ideology was more important than protecting the privacy of a parent within the school district. That is incredibly, incredibly concerning. You are starting to blur the lines of educator, school district employee, and political activist. Now, let me be clear with this. I understand the role of anonymous sources in news. I understand getting information off the record or behind the scenes as it relates to news. And to WHQR's credit, they are a news outlet. Now, they are a left-leaning news outlet, but a news outlet nevertheless. And part of the news game is anonymous sources. But I don't, as I mentioned at the top, I don't really understand what the story is here. Typically, when you're discussing things of anonymous sources, you're discussing news. You're discussing something that's going to happen. In this case, the anonymous source provided her information because it would make a good hit piece. The anonymous source provided her information to WHQR because it would fall down the path of book banning, which is something that WHQR has written half a dozen articles on. As it related to the book Stamped back from a couple of years ago, they are constantly talking about book banning, book banning, book banning. And of course, ginning up support on the left who show up to school board meetings and bitch and complain about book banning every single meeting, right? Even though it's not happening. Even though there's no indication that books are being banned within the school district, they continually show up with this false pretense and this false narrative. And it's because the left believes it's a good talking point. They do this because the left believes that they can win over the good graces of the voting public by claiming that Republicans are banning books. Republicans are trying to censor content that exists within the school district. And I've made this point before, not in some time, so I'll make it again. The school district does not have every piece of literature ever written available in its library. And so because of that, is it accurate to say that books that are not in the school library because they just weren't chosen, that those books are banned? I don't think that would be a fair assessment. I would say that the library is only so big. There's only so much room and so many resources that you have to purchase literature. So you have to pick and choose what's good literature, what's bad literature, what's useful for education, what's not useful for education. So the process of librarians within the school district purchasing one book over another under the left's definition of book banning could also be described as that. Now, I would never do that because that's a stupid argument to make. I would never make that argument because it makes absolutely no sense. There's no logic in saying, well, you chose book A instead of book B, therefore book B is banned. That's a stupid argument to make. I mean, it is nothing more than political gaslighting from the left. So when a parent challenges a book and goes through the process, Democrats want to claim you're banning books because you don't believe the content that was given to a child or checked out at a library was age appropriate for your child. You don't believe that the educational resources in that book were reasonable. You're allowed to do this. General statute, state law mandates and requires that schools have this process in place. And so it's incredibly unfortunate when left-wing media is deciding that they are going to be in the business of doxing parents within the school district who speak up in favor of their child's education. Parents who speak up in defense and in support of high-quality content being provided to their students. WHQR has drawn the line in the sand that they will try and get your private information. They will publish articles and drag your name and rake your name through the mud because it fits their narrative. That, to me, is incredibly concerning. And I'm glad that the school district and the attorneys within the school district did not release Josie Barnhart's name. I am glad that they chose to keep that information private, and I hope that is afforded to every other parent within the school district. What you're looking at here are political activists, far-left political activists within the New Hanover County school system that are willing to invade the privacy of not only their students, but their parents in order to score cheap political points with left-wing media. That's disgusting. There's absolutely no reason for it, and I would argue there's no place for it at all. So we've got an exclusive this morning with the Board of Education member, Josie Barnhart. She'll join me coming up here in just a few minutes. Before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington. When legal challenges arise, trust the law group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing issues like divorce, real estate transactions, or maybe you're in the position where you need a strong defense, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures that your questions are answered and issues are resolved promptly. Located in downtown Wilmington, they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. Board of Education member and parent Josie Barnhart joins us on the other side. You're listening and watching The Nick Craig Show live on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and 24/7, wherever you get your podcasts. Going straight to the source this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Josie Barnhart to our airwaves this morning on the Nick Craig Show. Josie, thanks for the time. It's greatly appreciated. Obviously, going through the details of your letter published yesterday, you're really harping in on parents' responsibilities in education, specifically dealing with what you call the legally binding process spelled out in the Parents' Bill of Rights. Before we get into any other details, can you walk us through what sort of avenues parents have as mandated by the General Assembly to be involved in what's going on in their children's classrooms?
Nick, thanks so much for having me, and I would love to do that. The Parents' Bill of Rights came out as one of the great things that came out of the last biennium of just talking about ways and a process that needed to be established for every single school district when there was an issue that arose. Because what was happening is there was this contention between schools versus parents, and it should not be that way. When there's an issue that's arise, there should be a clear process that all people can be protected with to be fair about any situations that is going on with their children. Because when I, as a parent, if I'm not there, then I expect the well-being to be done by the schools and vice versa. And so specifically in regards to curriculum content or course content, we in New Hanover County have a process that only parents are able to utilize if you have kids in the certain school system. So my kids currently are not in high school. So I would not be able to have any jurisdiction over any high school content. However, in elementary school, which my kids are currently, If there's an issue that arises at their elementary school, I am able, and have a process by law that I'm able to take an avenue through of concern so that it can be addressed fairly.
Well, you talk about this process, and obviously, without getting into any additional details on names and everything else related with it, what does something like that process look like for many community members listening this morning that may have questions about some of the content being given to their children? What does this process look like for a concerned parent, somebody that's involved in their child's education here in New Hanover County schools?
Absolutely. So when you submit a concern, you can go to the New Hanover County Schools website, and it says Parents Bill of Rights request for reconsideration. And so you have to share your contact information, your child's information, your school information, because you have to be a parent of the school. So, nobody off the street can just walk in and have this field process, but you as a parent are entitled to that through law. And so there are only a few things, again, by law, that allows for content to be removed. And so it clearly lists out what those are. And so for this specific concern, I was concerned with the maturity level for children, especially younger children, of the content. And I laid out all my discussions of why I felt it was a concern. And so that's what you do. It's a very simple. It's a one-page form. It starts with the book level at the school level, and then you have the right to appeal the decision. You have 15 days to appeal the decision to the district level. And that's just basically a different group of people setting eyes on the claims that you submit. And then as a parent, you also have 15 days after that decision is made to appeal to the board. And that is the board's decision to choose if they want to hear an appeal.
You mentioned this form and you mentioned the process, and going to some of the other details as I was reading through your statement yesterday afternoon, you seemingly are indicating that your private information was seemingly leaked to a local media outlet that ran a story last week. Josie, I'm going to ask you this. I think it's a fair question. Did you discuss this with other individuals that could have leaked this information to a local media outlet and potentially invading the privacy of not only you, but your children that are in the public school system?
Thank you for that question. And the short answer is no. This process for me and my family started over 6 months ago when my child came home with a gifted book from a staff member. And upon questions and dialogue, because this is what we do with our kids, of talking about the things that they're engaged in, reading with, when my child is asking me, what does NOOSE spell? Well, that's noose. What are you talking about? Let's give me some more context. And then there was some other weird stuff that came up as trying to explain what was going on. And then I'd asked, can you just show me? So then I started reading chapter after chapter after chapter. And I was like, there's a lot more to this book than what the back cover lets on to. And so I had addressed a concern with that staff member. And I waited a few weeks before I even decided to submit a request for reconsideration. But I thought if somebody was reading that book and thought, well, this is something that my child could relate to, going through a divorce, mixed race child, like this is something that, as innocent as it appears, and then to find out there's multiple chapters where these kids get at gunpoint pulled out of a car, handcuffed by one officer. The officer shoots the other little girl, and this is targeted at 8-year-olds. This is just a very intense thing to put in a book that is supposed to be talking about a kid going through divorce. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem to be a very common practice. And so when I had brought it initially up to the staff for concern, they were mortified that they had gifted this content to my child. And I was informed my child was the only one to get said content. So I said, well, after conversations with my principal, I said, I think that we should go through the process. And she said, I can respect that. And so that's what we did.
You mentioned in your statement as well that, and you just mentioned here, that you started this process over 6 months ago. It is important to note that you are a member of the New Hanover County Board of Education. You guys meet multiple times a month. I try to stay pretty in tune with what's going on and what's being talked about. Tell us why you chose not to amplify this on the stage that you do, in fact, have access to as a board member, and why you decided to let this process play out the same way that it would for any other parent across the county that is also not a member of the Board of Education.
Right. At that point in the decision making for my family was looking at this through the lens of, well, do I do something or do I not do something because I'm a board member? But this is a concern I had for my own child. And so if you're talking, am I a mom first? My answer is absolutely. So I could have taken the opportunity 6 months ago to create a situation of a media frenzy and a scene around this whole novel, but that was not the point. The point was looking at a content of saying, is this appropriate for our small kids? If I'm not aware about this and a staff member's not aware that was the one who gave it to my child, is this even appropriate? Let's just go through the process and just see, because that's what it is. And so the unfortunate thing, and I think you mentioned this, of the allegation of if I shared it with anybody. So I know I didn't, because I'm on the parent side, but then my information had to have been shared with staff members because they were the ones to evaluate the process. How many staff members? I specifically did not ask those questions as a parent because I didn't want to know. This is supposed to be a process that's supposed to be respectful to both sides, the school system and the parent, as you're working through. So I submitted my requests, and I expect to be treated with dignity. The only reason why they had access to my personal information, my children's information, my school information is because they are members, employees in the school district.
And you mentioned in your letter as well that your family, in this case, you talk about political targeting of individuals, in this case, specifically calling out Republicans that are in many cases being politically targeted. And Josie, I think it brings up the broader concern of retribution for parents that feel the need to speak up over content that is being either given to their students or their children, being shown in the classroom, being handed out. It seems to be that the threat of this is very real after what you've gone through over the last week or so.
Well, and I was extremely disappointed because it was not until Wednesday where I actually received the district result. I won't be sharing that. I'll wait until records requests are going to go into the district of what that result is. But the reality is, an article was released the Friday before the district was going to give a response to me as a parent. And I was informed April 10th that the committee was formed, the district level committee was formed, and that I would get a result sometime in the middle of May. That's all. That was all the engagement that I had with that. And so I anticipated, something last week, this week. After the article came out, I asked some questions to say, I'd like to know more about this process, because it very much appears that somebody was sharing information who should not have been. I asked for a copy of all of the documentation that was shared from the district FOIA request. Everything was redacted. So from the district perspective, the expectation of privacy was indeed there. So then that means the only other entities were people on the committee or processing the paperwork
That would have had access to some of this private information. And Josie, looking at some of the social media chatter that has taken place in the less than the 24-hour period since you've posted this, there's a lot of discussion that, well, your identity as a parent is not in fact private. Looking at some of these laws that protect the privacy of students within the school district. But I guess I'll just make this point. Regardless of the legality, does this not set a terrible standard for parents and guardians in our district, that if they speak up or have the audacity to comment on something in the classroom, that they could end up on the front page of a local media website because they happen to disagree with some content that may be given to their children?
And I think that's why my name was shared with media outlets is because of I think they even quoted me as the Republican school board member. And so to throw that in there, that was nothing to do with the complaint that I brought up, nothing to do the stance. Even honestly, I don't even know if there's a Republican stance on the issue of the book that I took issue with. So I don't know if there's a stance on that. Frankly, I have to look through the plan of organization to see if there is. But the reality comes from I wanted to issue a statement because I was frustrated with the process. And I wanted to encourage parents to say, you're allowed to speak up for your child. Even if you disagree with something that's happening, I expect teachers to reach out when there's an issue with my child, and I will do the same back. This is not a hostile situation here. Is when there's an issue that arises, you want it to be addressed, and you are allowed to go through the appropriate channels. And so I will reach back out and make sure, and I will say it publicly and ask it publicly. Did that parent go through the appropriate channels? I know that the answer is going to be yes, because I was the parent who did it. But to hear it coming from the district, yes, parents went through the appropriate channels. So there's an issue with the process. And I really hope that we can address that, because moving forward, I don't want people to be concerned about a process. You entrust us with your children at school. And so to be able to be clear about the expectations and protocols of what you can expect from us is important. But I would imagine that if people started saying, oh, well, that could this concern that I brought up in writing be shared out? Is that professional? Is that a standard of expectation? I mean, we know the answer. It's not. Like it's an expectation to have privacy. I know, even just from volunteer training, you're not allowed to share instances that happen at school that potentially give out the identity of the kid. And that's the whole conversation of FERPA. And I mean, I'll let attorneys battle that out, but a violation, when you have small children, their parent is their guardian. And so to say, oh, well, we're going to block out the student name, but the parent name, well, there's a direct correlation because the parent is acting on behalf of the student. Does that make
And
sense? And so that's
absolutely.
where this loophole of trying to get around of say, oh, I'm justified to know something. Well, I guess take it to court.
And I don't want to get too far down the road on this process, but you bring up the idea that policies need to change. It's important to note that you're just one member on the school board. You yourself do not have the sole authority to make sweeping changes to policies within the school district. That is a majority vote by the duly elected Board of Education. And then at the same time, Josie, you also bring up the fact that parents are the ones that have to submit this, not any random community member or activist from outside the state of North Carolina can submit these requests. This is a very tight rope that the district has to walk. They need to collect this information to make sure that this is a legitimate claim and it's somebody within the district. But then when you have potential bad actors that are willing to put politics over a merit-based process, that creates another double issue for the district as well. This is a tight one to deal with.
This is really disheartening as a parent, as a former educator in public education. And it's just really disheartening because there has been many instances where I've come to talk with happy parents, angry parents, frustrated parents, issues that we've had to navigate through. And so for this to be politically targeting and my kids to be the collateral of this is ridiculous. It's enough. People asked when I first ran, why don't more people with kids serve on the school board? This is the why. Is because I can take it. If you want to talk about how much you hate me as a Republican and you want to talk about the things that you hate about my decision making, okay, that is what I signed up for. As a parent, my children are entitled to a sound basic education just like yours are. And when there's an issue, you are allowed to address the issue, especially when it arises at school. Actually, one of the things that staff member said after I reached out initially was, thank you for doing that because we are supposed to be working together through this. And so if that says anything there, too, I think that's important to know. It was, I was angry. And it was very clear that I was angry. Don't get me wrong. But to have that open dialogue and communication, that's where this started 6 months ago. And to be here today, I'm incredibly frustrated and want
It's
to
already
change.
it's already being thrown around that once again a Republican is banning books. That conversation seemingly has never left. You did include that in your statement that you released publicly yesterday. What do you make of this whole idea that when a parent speaks up to get inappropriate or not age appropriate content out of the classroom, Josie, that they are engaging in the battle of book banning? Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I will tell you so it's the documentation. I think I forwarded it to you. The FOIA request documents has everything that I submitted of why I thought this book was not age appropriate for the maturity level. But the one difference that I added to the district level was from the time that I started the process at the school level to the time that it went to the district level, the board had voted to eliminate DEI initiatives from the district. And so I said, I also want to bring to attention with the board vote recently that should be taken into consideration as well. And if I had to make a guess, I would think that some of these overarching things that can be tied back to things like DEI, because if you talk about inclusion and remove accountability, that's what this is. Just because everything is permissible does not mean everything is beneficial for children. I'm sure you have, I know you don't have kids, but I'm sure you've been in the room before with children and something is being watched, a clip, and then you say, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot, to pause it or something. That's happened to every single parent in America. If you haven't, good for you. Teach me your ways. Because this happens, right? Sometimes you start something, you're reading something, you're watching a video, and something comes up and you're like, oh, you shouldn't be watching this. Oh, you shouldn't be hearing this. And then you pause it. We naturally take caution with our kids, as we should. We should be able to guard them from things that they should not be exposed to. And so this is one of those avenues for me that I'm pretty passionate about, because just because you bring up a concern doesn't mean you're a banner. Do I let my kids watch whatever they want to? No. We talk about the dangers of being on social media, the dangers of having unlimited access to the internet and stuff. Having boundaries for kids is necessary to produce quality humans.
Josie, as we wrap up the conversation this morning, what are your final words to parents throughout New Hanover County and maybe other counties throughout the state of North Carolina? As you mentioned at the top, the Parents' Bill of Rights is something that is relevant in all 100 counties across the state. What is your final message to parents this morning as it relates to their children's education?
Never feel bad for speaking up for your kids. Education should be a collaboration with your teachers and parents. That's how you're going to get the most effective results for your students. And so I'm going to encourage you to do that. The good stuff, great. That's the easy stuff. When it gets hard, still have those conversations. We need to be doing more of it. We don't need to just pretend everything's always good all the time, because it's not. We need to be able to openly address issues as we see them arise. And quite frankly, I see this as an issue. I hope this never happens to anybody again.
Josie, thanks for joining me this morning on the Nick Craig Show.
Thanks for having me.
What a miserable situation there that this even had to unfold. Appreciate Josie's time this morning. It's just, it's an unfortunate situation. She just walked through the whole thing for 20 minutes. She just walked us through the entire process. She's actively involved in her children's education. One of her children came home with a book, some concerns over some of the content in the book that we went over earlier, and it ends up turning into an attempt by WHQR, local left-wing media, to, as I've claimed, intimidate parents and stop them from doing this. That's not appropriate. I don't know how you can look at a situation like this and pump your chest and say, this is a great thing that's happening. This is a good thing for our school district. You want parents to be intimidated? You want parents to feel like they don't have the ability to speak up without the risk of their private information? I'm looking at the form. I've got it pulled up here. this morning. Here's the form that presumably is filled out. This is the request for reconsideration of resources. The name of the person, a telephone, an address, an email. So under what we saw unfold last week with this article being published by WHQR, all of this information should be out in the public? A parent's phone number and email address? Their name? Why? Because they disagree with some content within the classroom? Because they have some concerns over the educational viability of a piece of literature? I mean, who thinks this is a good standard to set? Who believes that this is good for public education? This is what I love about all of this. You constantly have to hear the left yelling and screaming about the importance of public education and how Republicans in the General Assembly don't give school system enough money and all these constant tears about public education. Yet the same actors on the left will use their position as members of the school district to release private information to local media. I'm reading a direct quote from the WHQR article. Several sources who wish to remain anonymous contacted WHQR suggesting that Republican school board member Josie Barnhart was the parent who had filed the complaint. So people within the school district that had access to this information, I asked Josie flat out, did you discuss this with anybody else? Did you go on a media tour telling people that you submitted the claim on this book? Her answer was no. And that seems to be pretty obvious because she filed the complaint 6 months ago. And it wasn't until recently that somebody within the school district, this is how it seems to me, that until recently somebody in the school district decided that it was going to be their prerogative to provide this information to local media. In an attempt to cast shade on Republicans, because of course that's all we do, and to, I would argue, intimidate other parents and encourage them to not submit this form, to not submit this claim, which, by the way, as Josie mentioned, is right on the school district's website. You click on Student and Families, Parents' Bill of Rights, and the form is right here. It's not hidden. It's not secret. You don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops and send a letter in the mail to get a form back. You just go on the school system website, nhcs.net, and click on Request for Reconsideration form. It's not hidden away. It's not a secret. It's not private. And it talks about the details. This is coming out of Senate Bill 49, the Parents' Bill of Rights, which, of course, Democrats in the General Assembly didn't vote for. It was the Republican GA that had to override Governor Roy Cooper's veto on this legislation. Why? Because Democrats don't want you to be involved in your kids' education. That's been blatantly obvious for decades now. We saw this really rise to prominence during COVID. Parents, for the first time, I would argue in modern history, actually got to see a firsthand view of what was going on in their kids' classrooms. Many of them were mortified with what was going on. They were asking themselves, why are we talking about racial justice in a math class? Why is my child's fifth grade math teacher talking about racial equality in an algebra class? Doesn't seem like there's any correlation between those two things. But that's what was going on. It's why you saw so many parents, non-political parents, get activated around the time of COVID. It's, I would argue, a large reason why 4 Republicans won in the 2022 midterm elections, sweeping the Board of Education for Republicans and changing control of that board from Democrat to Republicans. You had board members like Judy Justice who wanted to keep your kids out of school, wanted to claim that you're a bad parent for being involved in your kids' education and asking questions. Republicans rallied around this. Independents rallied around being involved in their kids' education and sent Democrats packing. And since then, Republicans have had control of the school board. This is a very disturbing situation. It's a disturbing story, and I think it sets a very dangerous precedent going forward. You as a parent should not be concerned that if you speak up for your children's education, you're going to be on the front page of WHQR and in their news reports. I don't think that's what parents are expecting when they bring up these concerns. And as we went through and read through Josie's statement earlier today. She says, if they are willing to do this to me, who is next? It's a very fair question to ask. If you have a political difference from individuals within the school system, is it now expected that if you form a complaint, that if you submit your private information, which your phone number and email, I would absolutely argue are private information, to the school district, that that's going to be released to the media? That that's going to be released to individuals that have the same political bend and lean as the activists within the school district? I don't think that's appropriate. Obviously, this will probably be a discussion within the school board over the next couple of months. I don't know how quickly the time frame goes for something like this. But as Josie Barnhart mentions, the process needs to change. Parents should not have to fear that their information is going to be released for speaking up for their children. There's just no justification for it at all. It's very concerning. To me, it's very frustrating as somebody that is involved in media when you see a story that is no story at all. There's no real newsworthiness in it at all, except somebody filled out a one-page form and submitted it to the school district, and it turns into anonymous sources speaking to local media. Appreciate Josie's time this morning. This obviously is, I suspect, is going to grow into a larger issue. There will likely be some discussions on the dais within the school board about this policy, about protecting parents and their rights to speak up for their children's education without the risk of being politically targeted. We'll keep an eye on all of that. If need be, we'll get Josie back on the show and talk about some of those details. I'll keep a close eye on that as well. Well, something interesting taking place. I was going through some details out of the University of North Carolina Board of Governors. They meet, the UNC system. They meet a couple of times. I think they meet like every month and a half or so. They've got 2 days worth of meetings that are going on right now. And as I was going through some of the details in the agenda packet that is taking place, I've got some great news for those across southeastern North Carolina. At today's meeting, there will be the May 2025 UNC System Board of Trustee appointments. And according to documents that are available in the meeting packet and agenda, it seems like Luke Waddell, Wilmington City Councilman, and County Commissioner Dane Scalise are set to move forward as members of the UNCW Board of Trustees here locally. The meeting is set to take place at 10 o'clock this morning, where these two names will come up for a vote for approval on this board. I think the idea of having two very prominent local officials, one representing the city, the other representing New Hanover County, on something like the Board of Trustees over at UNCW is a phenomenal idea. Details are a little bit scarce this morning as it's just in some agenda notes. The meeting, it will be available. It again starts around 10 o'clock this morning. So I'll be keeping an eye on that meeting, and we'll dive into some of these additional details tomorrow morning. A big news for UNCW, and I think the idea of having local elected officials on something like the UNCW Board of Trustees is a huge win for the community as a whole. I'll keep an eye on some of those details. Wanted to pass it along to you. Nothing set in stone yet. The vote is scheduled to happen a little bit later on today. I'll keep an eye on that and pass details along as soon as we get them. Well, a jam-packed Thursday. Again, appreciate Josie Barnhart's time on the show this morning. Also appreciate the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. You can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. If you're interested in show notes and more, head on over to patreon.com/Nick Craig, $5, $10 a month if you are interested in supporting the show and getting access to some of that additional information. That's going to do it. We're back with you live tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, YouTube, Rumble, and X, and 24/7, wherever you get your podcasts.